file charges against the parents for bullying them. Now, so the question comes back to what's the difference between bullying and discipline?
Today we decided we would start hitting the topic of some stuff around parenting. And I know not everyone's a parent, I get that. And some of us are, here we go. Approve. Add. Funny how the whole Facebook thing is. Eventually this will be smooth and timeless. Hi!
Hi!
Sorry about that. It's so funny. I feel so bad for everyone in the beginning when they're like, I'm stumbling around trying to make it work. I don't know why you and I have a goofy setup sometimes. Kind of funny.
Just, hey, you know what you tell those people who are you feel sorry for? Shut up. Just shut up. Just wait a minute.
I know, it's so silly how the way it kind of starts us off. I don't know if anybody's done a Facebook Live, but it's kind of cumbersome in the process. It's kind of an interesting way it starts up. Anyway, we're here. We're working. We're live.
Live, Facebook Live.
Live. So we really have been kind of gearing up for the last week to talk about this topic a little bit. I don't know if you've been posting. I know you were posting before I was a little bit about this whole Illinois law, which has been really interesting. I'd love to hear what everyone thinks, if they've read it, if they have done anything around understanding the dynamics around if you're, if you happen to be a parent and how it may affect your parenting style, or, maybe you don't even really care. I mean, that's okay too. That maybe they don't know what the law is. The law is Illinois passed a new anti-bullying law for parents and children. So they're saying that the file lawsuits on the parents, or at least bring charges against, not a misdemeanor or anything like a felony, but it's just the fact that the children can file charges against the parents for bullying them. Now, so the question comes back to what's the difference between bullying and discipline, right? Absolutely.
Because you can say, you're bullying me. Here, I'll give you bullying right here. That's what I know.
Well, and you know what, unfortunately too, if we really look back, there's been, a lot of parental styles have changed over time. Like spanking when I was a kid was totally, okay, that's what was used. My discipline as I raised children, you put them in timeout and didn't talk to them until they started to behave. There's just, and that could be a form of bullying too, withholding attention and affection. So there's a lot of different ways we can, break down different bullying and different concepts around bullying. So I think it's kind of an interesting conversation to kind of break down what is bullying to you. So how would you interpret bullying?
Well, yeah, I mean, I go back to, I teach bullying for school children as well as for adults at the corporate level. And bullying happens when somebody who's in a power position uses that position to adversely influence the behavior of someone else. And I think the key there is adversely. So, whether it's a sexual harassment bullying or whether it's I need you to go get me coffee bullying, whatever it might be, especially with kids, I'm going to take your lunch. So it's adversely affecting that person. Now, when we talk about parenting, there's a huge problem there for me because the kids could obviously interpret, and you and I know as parents, that what the kid could adversely be affected on here tomorrow is a great decision. And that, no, I'm not going to let you go to this party because there might be drugs or something there. Well, hey, you're bullying me to saying I can't use my own car or whatever it is to go on that, trip to go visit my friends. And you say, yeah, but tomorrow when we find out the party got raided and 16 people got arrested, it wasn't such a bad decision. So it wasn't adversely affecting you. So it's real tough, I think. And so as Tamra said, we have to look at different styles. I'm still an advocate of spanking because there's a difference between spanking and abuse. Spanking is to whack your kid to get their attention so they see that you disapprove of their behavior. Now, a lot of people are going to jump in here, and that's okay, jump in. I will tell you that my kid's 32 and doing absolutely amazing, and I probably whacked him 10, 15 different times throughout his young life, until he was like 14 years old, because I just wanted to get his attention to show that I really disapprove. Now, Tamra knows that I did this experiment when I was teaching college. I walked across the room whacking a board as hard as I could and asked my students, was that abuse? And half of my class of 30 said, no, that wasn't abuse. Well, we know if you whack your kid as hard as you can for even 5 or 10 times, much less 20 or 30, that's abuse. So we have to go back to deciding how we're going to teach people parenting, and then how do we differentiate between abuse, discipline, and bullying, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I personally also think there's a big element that I don't think many people think about, is every child is extremely different. Some children will work better with giving them a look and they'll change their behavior. Some need soap in the mouth to kind of stop cussing. There's different styles of, reprimanding or I like the word better, to recorrect behavior that's not really serving them. So, some people have strict morals and ethics that are a little bit different. So there's so much involved in this conversation.
But you're right. I tell the story. I had a stepson who was 5 when I entered the relationship. And then as they got older, what you found was the stepchild reacted to, I'm going to whack you. And my son, and when he was 4 years old, I whacked him and he was like, that didn't hurt. Oh yeah, well watch this. And when I whacked him real hard, he was like, nothing. Now you knew it was hurting like crazy because it hurt my hand. But what I learned then, and what I teach is, the one child responded to the physical discipline, and like you said, the looks and that kind of discipline, just the warnings, right? And the other one, if you took stuff away from him. So I could whack Zach all I wanted to, but what really happened was I would say, okay, if you do this, I'm going to take this away from you. And then he would react and go, no. And you go, that's your choices. So each child has different levels, different areas, and we as parents have to discover the difference in our children of what discipline works for one and what doesn't work for another. That's why I always tell people, your first child is the guinea pig, right? They learn because you learn. And the second child comes along and you're like, I think I know how to do this. And by the time the third or fourth child comes along, you're like, oh, I got this. Well, the first child's always like, that's not right. You did this to me. And we get to say, well, it didn't work for you, and I know it's not going to work for them. So.
Yeah,
but yeah, let's talk about.
There's definitely a lot to be even said about birth order. I mean, there is a lot going on in parenting, and I feel like a lot of us have this judgment or expectation that parenting is that we're the authority and the kids are our responsibility, which essentially, I guess if you look at it in the basic form, yes, that is correct. But there's more to that responsibility than just making sure that they, are doing what you think they should do. Your responsibility also comes through emotional, like are they feeling heard or understood or supported? There's such a diversity in the way we have to formulate parenting styles. So what what was that for?
Just a bug.
Just a bug. I was like, what is that? So I've learned that in my parenting, because I have 3 children and they're very unique, all different styles, expressions, introverted, extroverted, communicators, non-communicators, because even an introvert can be a communicator. There's just a very big plethora of, different emotions that are going on different times of the year. Their growth period. When they're younger, there's one way. When they're a teen, they're another. It's just, you got to learn to be flexible and move within the relationship of your child or that experience of being what stage you are in parenting. But when you go back to discipline, I think about in the moment, what would really help that child or help you feel supported, because it's a collaborative relationship, feel supported in that moment in the safest way. And usually we're in our rage, like we've talked about before. Usually when you're in this space of like, really, you're not listening to me, you're just totally frustrated, right? You're really attached emotionally. And I think a lot of our bullying scenarios, when it comes to this specific scenario, like when kids misinterpret parenting or discipline and interpret it as bullying, you're right, it can be easily misconstrued. And I think also subjective to law, because law can sometimes interpret things based on a black and white, and sometimes there's a lot of gray, right?
Well, I mean, who gives our children the authority to like bring charges against us? I mean, where does that happen? At what point in time do you say my child is knowledgeable enough, adult enough to be able to say this is bullying versus versus discipline? And so that's what I see as a problem with the law, is that now if somebody says something to them, or somebody from an outside source, and you know how that works, comes in and says, hey, you should file charges against your parents for bullying you. Well,
Right.
the kids can now at 8 years old or 5 years old or 14 years old file charges. And boy, that just makes no sense to me. So, I mean, yep, we should have a deal where it says you cannot abuse your children, and abuse should be really talked about. But the fact that they say we can't bully our children, and again, the bullying to me is the essence, the negative effects, the adverse effects it would have on that particular instance, because we know a negative effect right now, right, Tamra? A negative effect right now makes your kid mad, upset, makes them lose, makes them miss, makes them absent. They don't get to participate. But in the long run, that was a parental thing that taught them a good lesson. So it's a real tough place to be.
Okay, I just was reading Stephen's comment, and I lean your direction, Stephen. I am of a belief, and I'm not going against poor Steve here when I say this. I was not a physical enforcer because I didn't feel like that was the best way to convey my redirect. I agree. I kind of feel like a smacking is kind of more not within what I would use. Let's put it that way. So I've always been one who will redirect attention with either silence, because a lot of the times when kids are screaming, they're really angry, the fact that you're silent actually does redirect the behavior, because they're not getting what they want. They're not getting the feedback that they're hoping for. Or sometimes it can even be, just literally, just that moment of redirect, changing the environment. I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, where I'd actually pull my child out of the environment, in the sense like I would literally leave, like a screaming child. Think of a temper tantrum a child's having at the grocery store. I would just set the groceries aside and I would leave, and we'd sit in the car and talk about it. And sometimes that was just changing the environment would redirect the behavior. So it's really like, you have to know your sense of yourself. It goes back to that always, and understanding the dynamic. Now, I'm not saying that, Steve was wrong in the way he felt he needed to support his children. I more think that my style just wasn't that style. And I was able to be successful as a parent based on what I felt was within my wheelhouse. I really learned that going into anger or being more physical with my children almost stimulated the anger and the discomfort. So not just from them, but for me too, because I didn't feel like it was my best self. So I think if you know who you are and how you're navigating it, I think it can be a big element. I do think that our first reaction for a lot of people is more aggression. So if you can pull back and you
have to understand. But you have to understand that the physical, you can't administer the physical when you're upset. You administer the physical, like I said, 2 or 3 whacks is all you gave them on the seat of their pants. And you had to be in complete control of yourself. So I've been in both situations. I've watched people just reach out and whack their kid in the face, and I'm like, absolutely not. I've watched people whack their kid 10 or 15 times on the butt, and I'm like, no, stop. So all we're doing is conveying, that I'm not appreciative of what you're doing. And the other side of that is, I've watched people, I've been in rooms where the kids start getting mad at something, and then they start throwing things. And the parents tell them, no, no, no. And they take him and they put him in their room. The kid comes right back out of the room and starts throwing things. And it's like, wow, somebody doesn't have a clue. So it really started with before that. They had lost control of their child by not knowing how to discipline in any way, shape, or form. So would you consider that bullying? Would you consider it, abuse? Would you consider it,
Great point. Yeah, because when a situation's spun out of control to that level, what you're talking about, the blatant disrespect, it is that the paradigm has had no structure to begin with. I mean, that point in your life, that child does not respect you because there's never been a place of authority, or not even gosh, authority is not really the right word. There's not been a place of respect. They feel disrespected, you're feeling disrespected, and that just kind of elevates from that point. So yeah, you're right. You get a lot of kids who will act out, because the truth is, I am a big believer that everyone wants love. They want to be understood, they want to be seen, they want to be supported. And I just have this belief that the reason that there's this anger is because there's a disconnect. And so I'm always looking at the situation for, where is the disconnect, not the behavior, because the behavior is the reaction to the disconnect. So I'm always looking for, how do I navigate the confusion to help bridge the discomfort, right? So whenever a child's acting out, and I've worked with children, absolutely, that have literally put their parents through intense pain. Because I've also worked with children who've been brought into a family after foster care. So there's been all kinds of history that maybe didn't even have anything to do with that parent. So there's been a lot of that kind of, aggression in their lives. And how do they learn to siphon that energy in a way that serves them versus, lashing out to get control? And so I think it really boils down to, when a child is misbehaving or there's something really not going in a right direction, it can just really be seen as a opportunity to kind of slow down and look for those holes. Where's the disconnect? But you're right. I think it sometimes can be a bit hard if absolutely hitting in anger is never, ever served anyone, ever. I don't think it ever works. And that's just my belief on that. So I think that you're right. It's got to be in a neutral space.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people, because we don't nobody teaches discipline. We don't teach it to our families and our parents. And so I remember in one situation where a child started to act out and they went bizarre. And now the mom and dad are there and I don't do anything. But what I did down the road was I said, you know what? You're not respecting your mom and dad and you're not respecting me. And so I don't want to talk to you anymore. And as soon as I said that, boy, that child just almost glued to me and wanted to get my attention, wanted to talk to me. And I went, absolutely not. This is like a 5-year-old, it's like, absolutely not. When you act out like that, I don't want to talk to you. So when you apologize to your mom and dad, when you apologize to me, then maybe I'll talk to you. But I'm not sure, because when you were yelling at me and when you were throwing your toys, I don't want to talk to that kind of person. And it took him probably 10 minutes before he finally walked over to his mom and dad and apologized to them and came back over to me and apologized to me. And all it took was silence, right? As opposed to yelling and screaming, as opposed to anything else, it was just, we're done. And the kid wanted that love. He wanted the attention.
I believe that, because I believe we all want to connect. And I truly believe we just want to be, interacting and supportive and loving. So yeah, I think that most often, and I think of parents who are on the cell phones or in their gadgets or in their toys, children are emotionally just, longing to be connected to. So of course, when somebody new comes by, they're going to be like shiny new toy syndrome, I want to participate. I want to be in on this, and of course the excitement's there, but there's that disconnect again, like you were saying, the behavior's distracted. So yeah, it's very intense.
So when we look at the laws, again, when we look back at the law for Illinois, it's like, it'll be really interesting over the next 3, 4, 5 years to see what kind of, what things happen out of that law. How are they going to produce any kind of actual effect, and will it be frivolous lawsuits that are filed, and how much is that going to cost everybody? So it's again back to, all right, so I can't bully my kids, but I can discipline them. What's the difference? Because when I read the law, and I only read whatever they posted at that point in time, when I read the law, it wasn't dynamic. It didn't describe exactly what they meant by, bullying. And that had to be the definition, which is, we have to define exactly what they meant by bullying versus discipline. Because that's a huge disconnect. If I say I can't discipline my children because I'm afraid of being, bullying charges against me, that's a tough place to be.
Isn't that almost a loop? Like what you're just saying, it's almost like the parents now being bullied in exchange. It is kind of an amplified spiral. It's an attempt to do something, which is really beautiful, but it's almost like a disconnect, because the intention is, instead of educating, which I believe that the key word here is to educate, to help them understand what bullying is in your family, and really shift that experience, make them try something from a different perspective and learn something about their behaviors and how it doesn't serve them and doesn't serve your child. Or maybe for your child to be educated on what exactly discipline is. Now, of course, you're 5 years old, they're not going to be able to pick up on this as easily. But if you put this structure down and you help a child get support, they'll be empowered. And to me, everything's about being empowered for both people, not just the child, but the parent too, to have healthy communication and conversations that serve and create clarity versus chaos.
So then that brings up a question of, rather than passing a law that says, I'm going to do anti-bullying for all children, why not say, let's pass a law that the parents have to learn how to discipline. They have to learn parenting skills. Now that I might go for, it's like, okay, so here's the difference between abuse, here's the difference between bullying, here's the difference between parental guidance, or discipline. And you can't just say, hey, we're going to pass a law that says you can't do this if no one understands the difference. Right?
Well, yeah, that's why I think that this is where I think the law goes south, is instead of saying, hey, you have to pay your child, restitution, which, if there is true neuroses being established there, I really think that in order to change the behaviors, to get them educated to stop the behavior. It's not about making them pay for it. What does that really do? I mean, it just prolongs the abuse. Yeah. I don't get that. So that's where my issue is with the law, to be honest with you. And what's one other one I want to kind of like caveat onto this and add to this whole thing is why is it, so say, for example, a parent will buy a child a cell phone. The cell phone's intention is usually communication with the parents. They know things are going on, and to kind of gift them something, to give them a little independence, a little freedom, which I'm all for. Age according appropriate,
That's right.
let's like not get into the whole cell phone war, but I wanted to use it as an example. I truly think that the way we deliver this gift or extend this opportunity is where we break some of our abilities to help convey healthy boundaries. And I go right back to like when we were talking about structure and discipline right off the bat, when you give your child a cell phone, are they not kind of like signing a contractual agreement? I'll give you this phone if you promise to not let it distract you from your homework, stop you from it being a part of your life, all these things. You have a conversation to create safety around this tool, this asset. Not take it away when they're misbehaving in their grades slip and go, well, I'm going to take your cell phone if you don't keep your grades up. Then they feel like that's that resentment that gets established because there's never conversation in the beginning. That if I give you this phone, whenever your grades slip, I'm going to take it away because I feel like it's an obstacle and it blocks you from being successful. That conversation never happens. Guess what happens when you finally take the cell phone away? You're a jerk, you're mean, I can't believe you're so bully, you're so hard on me, you da-da-da-da. The whole story comes out. And it's just lack of clarity and lack of communication that created that experience. So I feel like sometimes if we just get a buy-in, if you will, I don't know if there's a better term for this, but if you get on the same page with your kid about certain conditions and agreements, then maybe some arguments and confrontation that is existing connect.
Well, you said it though. You said communication. That's the one thing that I think we lack so much is we don't know how to communicate. When I watch parents, either they haven't been, or they certainly don't know how at that moment in time to communicate with their children. And yeah, there are times when the kids are going to refuse to listen. There are going to be times when the parents are going to refuse to listen. But overall, if you understand communication, like you said, I'm going to communicate what's happening when I give you this, whatever it is, this toy, this candy bar, this cell phone, right? This iPad that can now call everybody in the world. And so you have to set the boundaries. Like you're not allowed to use this. If you want to call somebody, you get one phone call a day or something, and they don't get to call somebody 12 or 14 times. And those are the things that you have to start implementing from way back here when they're just young kids is how to communicate with your child. That's such a vital thing. I'm glad you brought that up because that's absolutely essential in everything we do until they get to college, right? How do we communicate with them until they get to be 18 and move away?
I struggled with this with my daughter. My ex-husband gave our daughter a cell phone in second grade. To me, that's too young, but I get why he did it. He was traveling a lot. He wanted to be able to have access to his daughter. He could have had access through my phone, absolutely. It was just, you know, just a different of parenting styles. Let's go that direction. And so what happened was she had a code where she could lock the phone. So it became a problem because I didn't give the phone. Her father gave the phone. She felt like it was a breach of her privacy, which it's really interesting, right? When you get into spaces like this, there's a lot of complicated, you know, territory. It's very difficult to navigate these spaces. So I'm not saying it's always going to be easy and it's not black and white. And the reason I share that is because there are times where you have to kind of help them understand the reason you need to have access is to help bridge the confusion, to help support them when things are going south. You're not spying on them, you're protecting them. And they have to understand that at this point in their lives, privacy doesn't look like they might think it should look because of the tool. Not necessarily you're disrespecting them, but you have to help them understand that there's a time and a place for certain levels of respect, because children are getting, unfortunately, sex trafficking is a real thing. Kids are being abducted. There's bullying that is happening that are killing children. It's a big deal. What's that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's all right. And one of the things, I mean, that gets back to communicating between husband and wife, or ex-husbands, ex-wives. But I mean, they have telephones out there now for what we always heard it as the elderly. I don't know what they're called, the butterfly or something, but it only could dial 4 numbers, you know? And so I was one of them, right? So if I was the parent, I would be one of them. You were the mom, you'd be one of them. And then maybe grandma or grandpa would be one of them. And then they have one other number that they get to choose. And that says, hey, you can now communicate with us anytime you want. But it doesn't put the onus of privacy so much on them, because that's what it's going to be is, hey, I get to call these 4 people. That's all I can call. And it changes everything. So a lot of times the communication we need between a husband and a wife, or an ex-husband and an ex-wife, really needs to work. And so unfortunately, when we get to that place, a lot of times there's so much animosity. And again, that's one of the problems with lack of communication. So much animosity between the exes that we lose focus on what's going to happen with the children. And the children are the ones who suffer in the long run. And so when they get to be 18, 20, 25 years old, they're still paying the price. And that's a tough place to be when they go, you don't understand, you've never understood me. It's like, wow, holy cow, they got bigger problems than I could ever hope to create, hope to fix as a mom or a dad, because there's so many conflicts in their life.
Absolutely. It's great. I'm sorry, I just noticed this post from Stephen. Exactly. It's exactly what we're saying. Do you really want to punish your child, or do you want to correct the behavior? That's exactly what we're talking about. Giving a child structure and support to grow and have a voice, or are you trying to repress and minimize them because maybe you're having a void? I hate to say it that way, but a lot of the times parents will dominate or live through their children because of a story within them. And it's a really important aspect to really consider. Are you disciplining, or are you punishing, or are you even living through your child? Because there's a lot of times that enmeshment, because that's what that is. When you're living through your child, you're not letting them live their own life. You're literally enmeshed in their lives, and they lose themselves, and they become codependent, and all these fancy words, but they become addicted to other people telling them who they are versus them defining their lives. So there's a lot going on around healthy parenting. It's more about cultivating and nurturing and loving someone to be independent, and we have to really recognize.
You know what's interesting, and I've owned several businesses over the years, and one of them was a sporting goods store. And I would watch, as you just said, I would watch the dad, let's say, come in. And he'd say, okay, we're going to buy you this, whatever, tennis racket, football, whatever it was. And the kids would be like, I don't really like it that much, And he's like, you're going to do this. You're going to do this. And you're like, oh, wow, right? Because and then they'd be in the stand screaming and hollering and punish the coaches for not doing this. And so they were controlling the child's life in the hopes of living through their child. It's a phenomenal thing.
Yeah, and that is a very real thing. But there's also times here's the polarity, right? There are times where your child's not inspired to do something, and you figure you expose them something, they'll try something new, maybe they'll find a new passion. So I do hear you there. But at the same time, you have to check into yourself. Am I pushing harder for this, because I want it for them because I didn't have it for myself, or you're just really trying to show them something new? Because
my mom, when I always say when I was growing up, my mom, I mean, again, I came from a whole different perspective even from what you came with. And when your mom or your dad said something back in those days, you just did it. And my mom said, you're going to take band in high school. I was like, you know, I played guitar. There was no guitars in band back in those days. And it was like, no, I don't want to take band. She says, you're taking band. And I'll qualify. I learned to play the baritone, which is like a mini tuba. And by the end of my sophomore year in high school, the band director pulled me aside. He said, Mr. Zapato, are you planning on, you know, trying to get into band next year, you know, at the junior and senior level? I went, well, I think my mom is going to want me to. And he was like, I'll talk to her. No. I mean, that's how bad I was at band. But yeah, my parents in those days said you will take this.
You had support on that one.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. There's encouragement and then there's control. That's a good point.
Yeah, and that's why, again, where I go back into this whole punishing versus, you know, behavioral, because I know this sounds really crazy, but truly kind of bullying can look very different in different aspects. You could be forcing a child to do something they don't want to do and not realize that's a form of bullying. It's really controlling and dominancy, and there's a healthy balance there that we should really play with and recognize. You know, I'm all for exposing children to new experiences and trying to, you know, learn different personalities about themselves and the diversity and the depth of their life. But there's also that element where, you know, you can push too far and shut them down and block them from connecting to you. And then all they hear is that whole Charlie Brown thing, wah, 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 you know, that they don't hear you anymore. And you're like, why doesn't my kid listen to me? A lot of the times it's because the actions over time validates whether they have a safe place or not. So it's important. It's important.
That's a real good point. We have to make our kids feel like, even no matter how you're disciplining, that they have a safe place, that they're loved, they're valued, and that's really important. When we talk about parental guidance, if you give your kid that, they'll usually come around to what you need. But, you know, they're all going to go through growth spots. I mean, you know, I hear people who say their 18-year-old is just way over there, and I go, give them room, right? I have people say my 22-year-old is this. I went, well, do they want to move out? And they go, they want to move out because they hate it. I went, then let them move out. And they go, but they're going to fail miserably. Let them fail. That's what we've all done, I think, in our lives. And yep, it's a hard lesson to learn, but some of us only learn the hard way.
Sometimes, and you know, and that's again going back to that whole thing, what we started with, learning to know what your child thrives on really does help you kind of have the handbook to understanding how to help your child. Not to manipulate, we're not talking manipulation, but knowing that, you know, their personality and the way they react and the way they respond can help you understand their perspective. So you can actually use that to help you bridge the confusion. You know, like I have one child who's extremely extroverted and you know, he's extroverted, but he's not a communicator, which is really interesting. He may be very outgoing, but he talks very surface about life, and he doesn't want to get deep. You know, he doesn't like to have deep conversation. And then I have a total introvert who likes to go deep. So, and he's a major communicator. Learning these attributes about your child's personality helps you communicate so that they understand you. Otherwise, you're kind of bumping a brick wall. You're kind of like trying to tell them to listen. And, you know, how do you feel? How do you feel? And the kid's like, I really don't want to talk about how I feel. You know, you're putting them into a space where they're not comfortable. That can be miserable for both of you.
And so the key on this is sometimes, I don't know, we probably should have done a little more homework and said, which books would we recommend if you're going through any of these situations? But one of us, and say, hey, what books do you recommend for good parenting skills? What do you recommend?
If you want to go there, 5 Love Languages. Love that book. Oh. It really does help you understand the way to communicate to your child's love language, which is great. What do you have?
There's like 7 different love language books, so don't just think it's the one about you know, love languages. There's also how to love your child love languages. There's how to love your grandparents love language. So the guy's done a great job. So make sure you pick out the right book out of that series.
Yeah, they're very, very similar, but they do address, if you have a specific relatable issue, you definitely want to find one that matches your concerns. But even if you just Google, you know, 5 love languages, you can have the breakdown of what it is. And it really is amazing to understand. There's some really cool, like, you know, you have ones that you need and the ones that you give, and understanding that dynamic about yourself. It's kind of fun.
And understanding that, you know, like when my son was growing up, we used to give him back massages, and we used to swap places and back massages, you know, and somewhere in that growing period, he now hates massages, right? I mean, hates them. So somewhere his love language when he was 6 was, hey, this feels good because I'm loved. And now when he's 30, it's like, no, I don't like back rubs at all. And so understanding that people change in their love language also will really impact how you interact with them. And it's a really good, that's an excellent book to read, you're right. And I highly recommend the 5 love languages. Take the quiz online if you also want to know your own love language. Because knowing what you like, knowing what your spouse or your children like is vital to all that success in a relationship.
And you'll be surprised. I know it's time. Sorry, guys. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate you being here. Of course, you can follow us on YouTube. We both have YouTube channels. You can also find us on our individual websites. Mine is tamra.blankenship.com. Steve, would you like to mention your website?
SteveZappatoSeminars.com.
Perfect. You can also email us using our, mine's Tamra at tamra.blankenship.com, and Steve is Steve at Steve Zapata's Seminar.
Nope, okay. Steve at SteveZapata.com.
Gotcha. So we love feedback. So thank you so much for all the information you guys are putting down there. We're going to respond to all of it. So don't think because we didn't respond to it here that we didn't listen. And please continue to share with us things that you would like to hear about. I know we talked about talking about what next week? What did we mention?
No idea.
Guilt. Guilt.
Oh,
next
guilt.
Week is actually Valentine's Day. It's the day before Valentine's Day, so maybe we'll talk about guilty love. So who knows? Maybe we'll see where that goes. But thanks again for this time, and we will see you guys next week. Bye.